Okay, welcome to your Start Shading 3-point final draft. So I've already shaded ahead so I could point some things out to you, and then I'll do some shading on this structure just to kind of review the process with you. So the one thing, and I kind of waited for this one because I do want this one to be darker than every other area. So for me, I put my light source off the paper so that I knew what it was hitting. And you don't have to do this. I just wanted to be able to show you, unless you have things on the ground. So I'm going to make this as if it's floating in the clouds. And then I'm going to have like the mountain peaks coming out of the clouds in the distance. I'm going to do some surface textures and some other videos, etc. So if you have, and you can move it, so it's just like moving the vanishing point. So let's say I wanted my light source to be up here. I'd tape it in your border. Well, then I could line that up with the edges of my structure so I know where the cast shadows will be on the ground. So for me, I just wanted to keep in mind that my light source is coming from the bottom left. So the left fronts of everything are going to stay white. So that's why I have those white areas. I have like the lighter to where the light's hitting, but then as it's fading and going behind stuff, it's getting slightly darker. And then the further away it gets from the light source, the darker it becomes, just for selective shading. So I also, because I have these edges, so I kept in mind that if the light was kind of hitting like the tops over here, then the sides would be slightly darker. Or like in here, I have some structures happening here, so then the side is slightly darker as if the light is blocking it. For areas where you have overlap or things in front of, so like right here, I have this plank coming out, and behind it I went darker so that this was lighter and it would come forward visually. So like here I did a little bit of shadow, it's slightly darker here to where it looks like this is blocking it. Or for this plank on top of this one, I went slightly darker below so that this looked like it's like on top and it gives it some depth or dimension. So therefore over here it's darker to make this one look lighter and pull it up visually. So there's a couple of things you got to play with when you're shading, just selective shading and perspective. Okay, so the first thing I would do is the glass. So I'm going to use 2B. I don't want it to get really, really, really dark. And I'm going to do newspaper padding underneath and a piece of paper underneath my hand. And I'm going to go in the direction that the side is. So this one is angled, so I did angled lines. This one goes to the left vanishing point, so I did lines to the left vanishing point. So this one I'm going to kind of use the same angle, and I'm going to kind of try to be precise, but keep it kind of sketchy. And I'll probably give myself a couple guidelines. Because I want it to be streaky. Okay, then I'm going to think like, okay, light is coming from this side. So therefore, on this side, the light would be blocking some of the reflection happening on the glass. So I'm going to go darker along this edge. And then I'm going to fade it into what I have. And I am keeping it kind of streaky because it's the glass part. And I'm going to have the most detail in this part because it's closest to the viewer. And I'm going to go a little bit darker on this side anyway. Okay, so then I am going to blend streaky. So I'm going to go in the direction of the streakiness. And I'm not really paying a lot of attention there because that's going to have a value on it anyway. I'm going to get a clean edge as clean as possible. So I'm kind of doing circles, but more kind of streaky blending. Okay, so I want some precise shininess. I'm going to use my mechanical pencil. So let me blend that a little bit more. So I'm as if this indented part's kind of blocking the light a little bit. And since my light source is lower, I'm going to do a little bit more further down. Be careful swiping your paper. Okay, so just to fade in the streakiness a little bit. Okay, so then I'm going to add some of my lines. Some long, some short. Then I'm going to clean up. Clean up as you go for craftsmanship. So that's one thing you can do for good craftsmanship. Clean up as you go, do the glass first, then you don't have to be so concerned about your edges. Okay, so I'm gonna use 2B, and then I'm thinking like, okay, so this whole front side is gonna be white because the light is coming from this side. And then if the light was coming from this side, then I would keep the right sides white and then add value everywhere else. Okay, so I want this area indented to look more sunken in to make this part look like it's coming forward. So in order to push this back, I'm gonna go pretty dark. And in general, I kind of want this structure to be darker because I want it to look like it has the most detail. And I'm also going to add, when we demonstrate the mark making, I'm going to add more mark making. Okay, so I'm going to add another layer at the top because I do want it to be fairly dark, kind of fading down a little bit. Okay, so then I'm going to go darker right underneath, so I have contrast with what it's next to. And I'm going to fade down, and I do want it to get a little bit lighter because again the light source is kind of coming from the bottom area. I'm just going to fade out. My blender will do the rest of the work for me. So I personally would shade everything, maintain good clean edges as you're doing that, and then come back and do all of your blending. So again, you're mass producing the shading. So then I'm going to fade out a little. Okay. To where it's a little bit lighter here and a little bit darker back in there. All right, so for this side, I'm going to go much darker so it has contrast with the glass, but then I'm going to fade out because then light would kind of be filtering and kind of hitting some of those areas as it moves away from the indented part. Okay, up top. And I'm going to fade down as well. And I'm going to go a little bit darker on the inside. Fade out, fade out, fade out. Fade out, fade out. And then I'll let my blender kind of do the rest of that work for me. Okay, so then I would blend that. So for this top part, so since my light is coming from the front is going to stay totally white. And then the top part, like I did back here, just a little bit of value. On that back edge, on the opposite side, facing away from your light source, I am going to add like a little bit. Holding my pencil in the middle or at the end. Just a little. And then I would fade that up with the blender. So remember, the blender will do a lot of the work for you. Okay, so if light's coming, then I'm going to probably go a little bit darker along this edge. And so remember, this is more selective shading. It's not necessarily super realistic. We're just trying to enhance the forms so they kind of visually separate from each other. And then fade out a little bit. Okay, and then here I'm going to go just a little bit. Okay. So then this side, I'm actually going to add a little bit because I want the front to look obviously white, like the light is fully hitting. You could go darker towards the bottom if you have this bird's eye view. So the further away you get from the viewer, you can go a little bit darker if you want, but then still trying to maintain the sense that light is hitting. Okay, so I'm just adding a little bit. Because it's such a tiny area, my blender is going to do most of the work for me. I just don't want it to be white because I really want the light to hit, like, look like it's hitting the front. Okay, so as you're blending, remember circular motion, and you do want to get clean edges. And honestly, like for this area, I'd probably use the bigger blender. I mean, because I can get a lot more done, a whole lot faster. So remember, you want to use the whole slant of the blender, or maybe you want to do the edges with the smaller one, and then your larger areas with the bigger ones. So remember, if it looks liney, like I can still see, actually it doesn't look too bad in the camera, but for me I can see it. I want to kind of fade down a little bit more. Fade down a little bit more. But I still want to keep this lighter area as it gets closer to the light source. Okay. So for big areas, big blender, small areas, small blender. The downfall is that big blender really is not meant for straight edges. So you might have to use your small blender to get the edges and then blend with the larger one as you're working into those areas. So I'm going to get a clean edge and fade out. So again, my light is coming from here, so I'm going to keep these sides totally white, and obviously the planks don't have a whole lot of value on them because they're getting closer to the light source, closer to the light source. And then in really light areas, your blenders are going to get pretty dirty, so then you can just use the blender for really, really light areas. Okay, so I will take a picture after I'm done blending of this stage, because then the next stage after this is surface texture. I'm going to do clouds, and then after that, we're going to do some mark making on top of it. So remember, it's not a whole lot of blending, a whole lot of shading, but the area that's closest to you, you do want the most detail. So notice how it's really liney on my glass, less liney as it gets further into the distance. So more detail and shading as it's closer to you, less detail as it gets further away. You need something underneath your hand. You need newspaper padding. You should adjust sizes of blenders for whatever size that you're blending. That will help with craftsmanship. Circular motion. You know, if it looks really bad and liney, fix it. Like, go add a layer in the opposite direction. And then, of course, if you're going to shade, let me move all this stuff real fast. Sorry, hold on. If you're going to shade with a light source, then your light source acts like a vanishing point. So I kind of did look at, like, oh, you know, where would that shadow on this part end? So I kind of estimated with my light source. I used a ruler, the poster board ruler a little bit. Like, if the light source is coming here, like where would it block like shadow? And actually it might make a little bit more of a shadow edge there, a little bit more obvious. So use your light source to guide your shadows. And if your light source is in your picture, then it acts like a vanishing point for sure, especially if you have surface ground to put cast shadows on. Okay, good luck, have fun. They're coming to life. Your drawings are coming to life.